What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. The Oklahoma City Thunder are headed to the NBA Finals after finishing off the Minnesota Timberwolves 124-94 last night behind Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's 34 points. The New York Knicks will look to stave off elimination against the Indiana Pacers at the Garden tonight. Pacers with a 3-1 lead. Knicks looking to push the series back to Indiana. Tip-off on TNT at 5 p.m. Oregon State Baseball is the number 8 national seed and will host St. Mary's in the Corvallis Regional tomorrow. Oregon is the number 12 seed and will host Utah Valley in the Eugene Regional. Coming up on the big show, we got a jam-packed 3 hours for you. Hour 1, catching up with Ryan Harlan from BeaversEdge.com, talking some Oregon State baseball. Hour number 2, and Aaron Fentress, talking some Blazers, some pre-draft workouts, some NBA, a little bit of everything with Fentress, and then wrap up with Mike Doc Parker in the third hour, getting his thoughts on the Corvallis Regional. You've got the Rip City Drive on a Thursday. Rip City Drive here on a Thursday. Brendan Slaughter here with you. Hope everyone's having a great start to their, or rather, great wrap up to their Thursday. Excited to bring you guys 3 hours of radio here on a Thursday afternoon. Not quite as nice today. Wasn't yesterday quite something here in the Pacific Northwest. But today we get a little bit more cloudy. Some sun's breaking through. But it looks like it's going to be pretty nice weather this weekend, which is great news for Oregon and Oregon State baseball fans, as both teams will be hosting regionals this weekend. Going to be some great baseball down in Corvallis and Eugene. Definitely amped up, definitely already ready for that to get underway. The respective teams have arrived in their respective regionals. Today is a largely practice day for a lot of the teams. So you're seeing, obviously, Oregon practice along with the 3 other teams in their regional. Same with Oregon State. So we're really dialing in, and then you're going to see the early games, the 2-3 games, going on early during the day tomorrow, and then obviously Oregon and Utah Valley in the afternoon, and Oregon State, St. Mary's as well. So lots to get into. It's going to be a baseball weekend here in the great state of Oregon, and I'm here for it, folks. To have this much good college baseball right here in the 503. And, well, technically the 541, if we want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, is pretty cool. And I'm definitely excited to see how each team does, and very excited to see ultimately how things shake out. But we'll get to that a little bit later in the program, more specifically about 20 minutes with Ryan Harlan. But got to start with the big news, and that is the Oklahoma City Thunder dispatching of the Minnesota Timberwolves 124-94. They take the series 4-1. Again, big game for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander last night. He scores 34, also chips in 8 assists, 7 rebounds, also has a couple steals, and he was the engine once again. You got 22 points and 7 boards from Chet Holmgren. J-Dub, Jalen Williams, flirted with triple-double numbers at 19, 8, and 5. Lou Dort had a solid 12 points as well, and then coming off the bench, you had Isaiah Joe and Alex Caruso chipping in, just under 20 points as well. So you're really seeing the Thunder and their depth, and that's what we talked about yesterday, their depth being able to kind of overwhelm teams. They play great defense, and, man, it's about how I expected it to go last night. I thought there was a chance that you could have had a, Anthony Edwards, big-time game as far as, like his, hey, we're staving off elimination, I'm going to go off for kind of 40 points. Didn't happen last night. Anthony Edwards, 7 of 18, 1 of 7 from 3, 19 points. Julius Randle was actually the Timberwolves' leading scorer with 24 on the night. They just didn't get enough. You had 11 from Naz Reid, and you had 11 from Terrence Shannon, but just not enough for the Wolves in this one. And, you talk about Mike Conley, Rudy Gobert, pretty limited in this game, along with Jaden McDaniels. Those 3 combined to go 3 of 17 from the field and just 7 points. And those are 3 starters. So just not an ideal situation for the Timberwolves. You knew the deck was kind of stacked against them when the Thunder were able to have a clinching situation back in OKC. And that's exactly how it played out last night. So now we have the over 80 win Thunder when you count regular season and postseason. Thunder waiting for the winner of this Pacers-Knicks series. And, as we look at it now, it looks like it's probably going to be the Pacers, but, still got to get that last win. And New York's at home tonight. So I definitely give the nod to New York to push the series back to Indiana tonight or after a win tonight. But again, we've seen that series like the Garden and New York playing at home hasn't necessarily meant like a big time home court advantage. So I would expect that in this game, with their backs against the wall, the Knicks are going to come out and play maybe some of their best ball of the postseason tonight. But nevertheless, we'll talk a little bit more about that game as we get a little bit later into the broadcast. But again, the Thunder take the win over the Timberwolves 124-94. Lots of audio from the game last night we're going to get into. Let's go ahead and start with Chris Finch on how the Thunder kind of lost, or excuse me, how the Timberwolves kind of lost their connectivity in this loss to the Thunder.
We started trying to force it all, individually, one-on-one, and I think we had, a bunch of turnovers in that next phase of the first quarter. That obviously got the crowd into it, them going. And then we just struggled to find a rhythm. Everyone was kind of trying to do it all by themselves. We lost our connectivity, but all credit to the Thunder. They certainly deserved this. They played outstanding, and, we came up short in a lot of ways.
Chris Finch, head coach of the Timberwolves, saying they came up short in a lot of different ways, and he had a couple more thoughts, particularly on what Anthony Edwards learned from the series, and also one thing we really talked about is the Thunder put so much pressure on you, right? Their defense is swarming. Their ability to throw multiple guys with length at you is, kind of second to none in the NBA. And Chris Finch talked about how there really wasn't a whole lot of off-ball fouls called in the Thunder last night.
I think we could have been a little bit more physical ourselves. I think off-ball they were super handsy. I saw a lot of off-ball contact. Their off-ball defense was largely focused on trying to jam him up and keep him from being able to get the ball in clean space. I find it also a little interesting that throughout the entire series I can't remember an off-ball foul that's been called after 4 games, which is kind of unique. So that's just speaks volumes of the credit to their off-ball defense. So.
That's Chris Finch talking about the Oklahoma City Thunder, and again, I think it's at home you're going to get away with a little bit more of a friendly whistle, and I think it's the Thunder are kind of known for having a swarming, aggressive defense, and I think when you have kind of that kind of chip on your shoulder, and the league kind of knows you're known for that, you can get away with a little bit more, and in a clinching game, I mean, to that extent, like the Thunder are just going to get a few more calls. And, I think it's interesting, just as I was playing that last clip, I've got some previews looking at the game tonight, and they're talking about the Thunder win on TV and mentioned this is the youngest team to make the NBA Finals, the Oklahoma City Thunder, since Portland Trailblazers, the year they won their championship. So a little bit of random news there, but just to show how young the Thunder are, it shows like the young Blazers way back in the day. So that's kind of a cool little nugget that the Thunder are the youngest team to reach the finals since that Trailblazer team back in 1977. But just finishing up the thoughts on the Timberwolves and the Thunder. Last thing from Chris Finch, Minnesota Timberwolves head coach. He talked about what Anthony Edwards was able to learn from this series.
He's got to learn to play against that physicality and that type of kind of holding all the time. I think, they made it really hard for him. I thought for a lot of the series he did make the right play, and, we preach that to him all the time. Yeah, we need him to be aggressive for sure. He's got to find some easier buckets. I got to help him do that. I think we were never able to establish something consistent with him. And that's on us as much as anybody.
I would wholeheartedly agree with Chris Finch there. It never felt like Anthony Edwards was in a great rhythm this series. And, when you take a step back and look, I don't think too many people thought that the Timberwolves would be in the Western Conference Finals 2 years in a row. They lose in 5 games both times, but nevertheless, they made it there. And I think now the question is for the Timberwolves, how do you continue from here? Because we know that Anthony Edwards is on the ascension path of being, a star in this league and can be a guy, an alpha, someone you really want to build your team around. Now they've got some questions, right? Like, what's Mike Conley's future? Does Rudy Gobert still fit? I like Julius Randle. I like Jaden McDaniels. I like Naz Reid. But I think the Timberwolves might need to consider, some changes because they've come up short in 5 games 2 years in a row, and that's not, just a one-off year. That's kind of a trend that your ceiling is maybe a bit there with where this roster is. So, nevertheless, very fascinating. Switching gears, let's go over to the Thunder side of things. The Mark Daigneault, Thunder head coach, talked about the team's synergy, taking this and advancing to the NBA Finals.
These guys are uncommon. They do everything right. They're professional. They're high character. They're idiots. They're competitive. And most of all, they're team first. They embody everything it means to be a team.
There's something to like about Mark Daigneault when he, is completely joking, saying, they're idiots. But it's almost interesting because this young Thunder team, he's grown with them, right? So it's not like they respectfully took the Houston Rockets route and paid, Steven Silas to, ultimately lose before they're like, okay, let's go hire, Udoka and start competing. No, Daigneault was there 2021 or 2020, 2021 when they missed the playoffs. The following year when they missed the playoffs, and the following year when they missed the playoffs. 22 wins, 24 wins, 40 wins, and then you see 57 and where we are now, counting postseason over 80. So he's grown with this team, and talk about the patience. How many other teams and, looking at the Rockets would have been like, okay, we've missed the playoffs 3 years in a row. Things are starting to click, but maybe we need a new voice. No, they stuck with Daigneault, and I think that's definitely a big reason where they are. They play great team basketball, and most importantly, they've grown. They have shown what they've improved from again, 22, 24 wins just a handful of years ago to where they are now. Daigneault's talked about how much this team has grown.
We've got a young team. We've had a young team the last couple of years, and the positivity in the community, the support, the encouragement through the ups and downs really puts the wind at our back. And when you've got a young team, these are players that are still trying to find their footing in professional basketball, and to exist in a place both in the arena and in the community where everybody kind of has your back through the ups and downs is helpful. It's helped our players grow. I really believe that.
It's truly like a family situation, and almost like, we've grown together. We started at the bottom and now we're here, right? And Daigneault talked about how it's not just, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for this team. They've drafted well, they've built up depth well, and they play great team basketball, and that's why they're in the NBA Finals.
They're high-character people. They come from high-character circles. They're unbelievably competitive. They put the work in behind it consistently through the ups and downs. And most of all, they're team first. I said that on the court, but they embody everything it means to be a team. And so they deserve this. They deserve the opportunity that we have now. I couldn't be happier for them because they invest so much in their own games, but they also invest so much in each other and in the team. And I just think it's a really uncommon thing in professional basketball that they've built.
Couldn't agree more with Mark Daigneault. It is uncommon. Like I was saying, a little bit earlier in the week with Tyrese Halliburton, at least from my perspective, being a little bit less ego and more team-friendly, as far as what his game is. And the Thunder kind of embodied that too. Obviously, Shai is the alpha, but it is a team experience there in OKC, and I think that's underrated in today's NBA. We'll go ahead and take a quick break. We'll hear more from the Thunder and the Timberwolves and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander a little bit later in the program, but when we come back, we're going to be catching up with Ryan Harlan from BeaversEdge.com. He was he is down in Corvallis. Went and checked out the first day of the Corvallis Regional today with the practices and whatnot. Curious to get his thoughts on the regional as we head in, his thoughts on the Beavers being a national seed, and much more. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Thursday. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a beautiful Thursday afternoon. Pleased to welcome on our next guest. He's a senior writer for BeaversEdge.com and a good friend of mine, Ryan Harlan, back on the program. What's going on, Ryan? How are things in Corvallis, my friend?
Going good, Brendan. Thanks for having me on again. I mean, it's a beautiful sunny day in Corvallis. It's always sunny in Corvallis most of the time. But vibes are high. I mean, especially too while getting ready for the Corvallis Regional tomorrow, which I'm excited for. I know that'll be my last regional as a student reporter, which is kind of surreal to say that out loud, but like it's true. It's kind of a neat kind of moment where I'm like, hey, whatever happens this weekend, enjoy it. Like, it's going to be fun no matter what.
Well, absolutely, Ryan. And then, putting the cart a little before the horse, them being a national seed means you might get some supers at Goss, too. So it might not just be one weekend, my man.
Yeah, a 2-for-1 special.
Exactly. Well, again, appreciate you taking some time, Ryan. A lot to get into here, but let's just start with, obviously, the big news since we last spoke. You talked about at length that, the Beavers being idle last week needed to get a little bit of help across the country, whatever that looked like, however that looked like. It was hard to kind of put words on exactly what it looked like, but they did. They end up as the number 8 national seed. When I was watching the selection show Monday morning, Ryan, and I got to say, NCAA baseball selection show, Ryan, they don't waste time. It's not a 4-hour show. They get it done, which I appreciate. And they're sitting there listing off, the teams, and you see Oregon State come in at 8. What were your thoughts on the Beavs being a top 8 national seed?
I honestly thought that that was right about where they should have been, but also too, I think going into the selection show, I also was like, okay, you're RPI wise, you're in the top 8, but now it's a matter of the committee being able to make that decision and be like, okay, this is where we think the Beavers belong. And that was something where I think the uncertainty even around that, in addition to kind of what things look like across the country, was kind of where I had my concerns. But when I saw the top 8 seed, I was like, all right, you took care of business. You did what you needed to do. And now you're in a spot to play more home games this baseball season, than you have this entire season. So you get an opportunity to have more baseball at Goss, and I think the Beavers themselves being in a spot not only to host a regional but a super is definitely something that Canham and company, I think, we're looking forward to. And also it saves you the headache of traveling as well. You get to have all those games here before you eventually, I know putting the cart before the horse a little bit here as well, but if you win supers, you go on to Omaha, and you've been there before, you know what it takes, the expectation. But the fact that you get to do it all at the comfort of your own home in front of your own fans, I think is a welcome sigh of relief, given kind of how, kind of uncertain things were before, you get officially announced as that number 8 seed. So I think it's huge. I think it's really huge. And I know the guys are definitely excited for that ability to be playing in front of their fans here starting Friday.
Catching up with Ryan Harlan here on the Rip City Drive. Ryan, appreciate your time. And, I definitely agree. I think it's a nice, I almost want to just say a present, a bonus. When you consider that Oregon State only had 19 home games this year, Ryan, and then you go look at the other top dogs that are hosting, right? The Vanderbilts, the Arkansas, even to an extent, Oregon, UCLA, some others. You're talking at least 30 home games. So if not more. I was looking at Arkansas. I think Arkansas had something like 37 home games this year. So, that is such a stark contrast. And do you think that may have been just how much they were on the road this year ultimately pushed that selection committee to give them that 8th spot?
I think so too, and the way that RPI is kind of handled,
Sure.
I think that probably gave a little more in favor, a little more RPI kind of favorability schedule. But at the same time, though, I feel this is across baseball, right? I think all teams kind of do this a little bit to, make a schedule that's favorable towards RPI to get in that spot to be able to host not only a regional but a super. But I think Mitch Canham kind of went into this season and building out that schedule being like, look, yeah, we're going to be playing a lot more on the road, but we also want to be playing against high-quality opponents and high-quality teams throughout this entire season, and I think that's what he ended up getting. And I think when you look at where like Nebraska finished, how Iowa looked this year as well throughout the course of the season, and then obviously Oregon and the way that played out, but like those kind of, I would say, series or so, like I think they ultimately factored into the committee's decision to give the Beavers that number 8 seed, because at the end of the day, right, like, it's more, you can control what you can control, and then you just basically have to see what other teams end up doing. So I think there's a little bit of gaming the system slightly, but in a way that, still allows you to play a competitive schedule, one, and then two, get to your ultimate goal, which is not only hosting a regional and super regional, but getting back to Omaha. And I think that schedule has set up the Beavers nicely because, like, you've played against a wide variety of opponents. So you're basically going into this regional expecting, what you're going to see from these three teams, but, like, you kind of know generally, like, all right, like, we have this team coming in here. We're not scared. We know what we're getting ourselves into kind of mentality, where it's like we've seen a lot of different teams play different styles of baseball. We'll be fine. Basically, I think is that kind of mentality that Mitch and his crew have adopted coming into Friday's game against St. Mary's.
Beavers do open play Friday against St. Mary's in the Corvallis Regional, the 1-4 matchup. TCU and USC also make up the field. Ryan, you obviously were at Goss today, went and grabbed your credential and kind of got a lay of the land. Is it kind of the calm before the storm a little bit? How were the vibes at Goss Stadium today?
Vibes are great. Vibes are pretty relaxed. I would also say, yeah, kind of calm before the storm. Everybody's getting Goss ready to go and
Nice.
set up. So it's definitely a lot of that. I think kind of more of a like, all right, we got a game starting Friday, so we need to get stuff ready to go and squared away. But like, I know going into grabbing my credential, I just see, all the SIDs hanging out, watching baseball and eating some lunch. I'm like, man, that must be nice. Like, I know, like, before I hopped on, I was doing some stuff for Capstone. I was like, must be nice. I wish I could be doing that right now. But yeah, definitely high vibes. I would say all around.
Oh yeah, Brian. I mean, I totally get that, man. It's like, me hosting a couple days this week. We're all putting in the hours working for the weekend to get ready for some Oregon State baseball, man. And I'm excited to get down there and see things myself on Saturday. And again, it's going to be just an awesome atmosphere. It always is when Oregon State gets to host. We're catching up with Ryan Harlan, senior writer here for BeaversEdge.com on the Rip City Drive. Let's talk a little bit about the field, Ryan. TCU, SC, St. Mary's. We talked about it a little bit on the Beavers Edge podcast earlier this week, but who catches your eye now that you've had a little bit of time to kind of digest the teams a little bit?
I definitely would say TCU and St. Mary's are definitely the two, especially too with how St. Mary's kind of like runs the bases, and very much a team that is not afraid to steal bases either. So being very aggressive on the base pass, I think, is something that I think you're going to have to look out for in that 1-4 matchup as well. Like, Wilson Weber is going to definitely have to be on his P's and Q's about that, and kind of challenging guys as well that try to steal or try to get a good lead from the base. So that's something that I do think that will be a key point of emphasis for Rich Dorman and crew. Like, that was a big issue against Oregon. And then after the Oregon series, they've gotten better at it. The Beavers have gotten better at keeping guys on base, kind of holding them there, and then, delivering a pitch on the opposite end. But like, that's something there. And then TCU, especially as a team and the way that they're built, they got some dudes, and also too, with like their record and where they were at. I know I said that to you earlier. It's like, yeah, they were in position to be a host, but losing to Arizona in the Big 12 tournament knocked them out of that spot. So they're going to be a really tough 2 seed if they, do what they need to do to stay in the winners bracket. and win that first game against USC. So I think those are really the big two teams that I'm kind of looking for, especially like just seeing the breakdown between St. Mary's and Oregon State. Like that stat about stolen bases is like kind of eye-popping, and I'm like, oh, okay, like, yeah, that's going to be something where I think, you know, that's going to be a deciding factor, or at least one of the deciding factors in that game, especially if the Beavers can control that. I think they're, you know, in a good spot to take care of business and do what they need to do. But that's something where, like, I think, like, getting a little more time to digest and see the matchup, see who they have coming out on the mound to pitch, like, okay, like, I kind of can see where this regional is going to be shaping up a little bit just based on, like, early impressions. But, of course, we don't know until, you know, you get out there and you start playing baseball on Friday.
Absolutely. And just from diving into it a little bit ourselves, and, you know, we've got a Corvallis regional primer up at beaversedge.com you can check out. But, you know, just looking a little bit, you know, deeper into it, Ryan, I definitely agree. I think the St. Mary's matchup is intriguing. And kind of what I said earlier on the podcast this week in regards to USC, respectfully, this is not your grandfather's USC, and not even, you know, I mean, it's just, I know USC is such a power, right, Ryan? They have all the titles, you know, but they're respectfully from a couple generations ago. And, you know, I haven't seen USC baseball be particularly impactful in the postseason in quite some time. So, you know, maybe that changes. But as I look at it, I kind of see TCU as the biggest threat, you know, in the Corvallis regional, because they had a strong case to host, Ryan.
Yeah, they had a really, really strong case to host. And I know if you kind of see where pundits kind of had them, like, yeah, I could see that argument, like, for why they should have been in consideration for hosting. But, you know, like, I think it's going to be kind of similar to last year with UC Irvine coming to Corvallis, and kind of the way that UC Irvine team was built, and kind of reminds me kind of similarly of the two, between the two. So that's something there where it's like a tough 2 seed that could have been, you know, in consideration for hosting, coming to Corvallis. There's some parallels there I can kind of see, and that's something where, like, I think, you know, for Oregon State, like, you know, you just have to make sure you get all the kind of mistakes out early. If there are any rust off, shake that off as early as possible when you play St. Mary's, because if TCU takes care of business against USC, that's going to be a really tough matchup, in my opinion, that game, because, like, if you can at least get them into the loser's bracket and having to make them play twice, that ends up in your favor. But, you know, you got to just take care of business Friday, and then you take care of business Saturday, and then you're basically in the driver's seat, basically, at that point for cruising to a win in your regional. So that's where I kind of think it's like these first two games of the regional, I think, are going to be the most important for setting the tone early for Mitch Canham and crew.
Yeah, and I think that's the recipe for success, Ryan. I think the numbers have changed a little slightly over the years, but, you know, just a couple years ago, it was the team that, you know, wins their first two of a regional, win that regional 80% of the time, right? So it is key to go up 2-0 and then make a team have to come through the losers bracket and beat you twice, and obviously you have the benefit of being at home. But, you know, I'm curious, Ryan, as we got to see game notes and started to see projected matchups for tomorrow on the mound, I'm a little surprised, but TCU is going to go with their ace, Tommy Laporte, tomorrow against the USC Trojans, if game notes and what they put out there are to be believed. Does that surprise you at all? It kind of caught me a little by surprise that they wouldn't maybe save their ace for a potential Saturday matchup with the Beavs.
Yeah, that kind of surprised me as well. I also think too, like, it might have been a decision of, like, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, if it's been working for us, you know, why not change it? Like, I know Mitch Canham is going with Eric Segura, right, to start the Friday matchup against St. Mary's. So I think, like, with the way that probably both coaches were probably thinking, like, hey, we're going to throw our guys the way that we normally do in a weekend series, and then kind of go from there, or make any adjustments as we need to, depending on, you know, the outcome of those first two games on Friday. But Yeah, a really surprising one at least because like the way that TCU and USC stack up, in my opinion, like I think that could have been a game where TCU could have been in the driver's seat probably from their Saturday guy and be, probably pretty okay for getting into a matchup with the Beavers. But like I think I had said it to you beforehand, like maybe it's more of like these guys have like their routine and what they do to get ready before a weekend series. So like your Friday guy obviously has his routine Saturday and Sunday. Guys have that routine of how they get ready, how they get prepared, what their bodies are going through, practice, lifts, warm up and all that stuff. Like they probably don't want to change that or probably want to, rush a guy or anything
Sure.
like that, depending on whatever games that they had played previously the week prior. Because out of all of them, it's like, yeah, Oregon State's gotten that rest, so I think that rest is going to be really beneficial for Friday. But like, I think that probably plays a role, if I'm being honest, as to why they just decided to go with TCU decided to go with their ace on Friday. But definitely a very interesting call nonetheless, because I do think TCU was a way better team, and you could be okay with, your number 2 or 3 guy against USC. It's not to like downplay what USC brings in this regional. It's more of the matchup, in my opinion, I think more favors TCU than anything else.
Right. No, I just found that interesting, right? Because sometimes when you start moving some pieces around and playing the matchups, it can obviously benefit you and it can also hurt you. So definitely that was something I was curious of. And get this, Ryan, this is something that just shocked me when I was going through kind of the game notes today. TCU has never played in a regional on the West Coast, ever. Like, how nuts is that? Like, you just think about, like, how many times, Ryan, the Beavers played in a regional and have been sent, like we've talked about, to, Virginia, to Baton Rouge, to Gainesville, and TCU's never been out to the, like, they're going to be, I got a feeling TCU's going to be maybe a little culture shock coming out here to the PNW, my friend.
I would say so too, and I think their fans are a little bit as well, kind of feeling out what the West Coast is like, what
Sure.
Corvallis is like, and their notions are kind of being preconceived notions are kind of being challenged a little bit. But yeah, that's definitely something for them. I think is going to be a bit of an adjustment, a bit of a change. Like I know, right now it's sunny, but they're like earlier this morning it's kind of overcast, kind of gloomy, kind of hazy, a little humid. But I know those guys are probably already used to that kind of weather. I mean, I know myself, it was like not too bad humidity earlier today. But like the kind of difference, I think, in climate temperature, and also too with the fact that like, you're at least going about an hour or two, behind where you're normally from anyway. So that
Right.
adjustment is something that's going to probably also play a factor in terms of time zones and stuff, with rest between games and things like that. But like for them, yeah, that's going to be an interesting performance in a West Coast regional
Right.
for the first time ever. It's like Ivar Arquette not hitting a home run at Goss Stadium in the 19 games that the Beavers played this year at home. Like it's a kind of like that's odd. That's
Right.
interesting. Like I never would have thought that. You'd think they'd at least playing maybe one or so, or at least 2. But
I think
yeah.
It's definitely interesting because I think it just shows how much Texas usually has other teams hosting, right? So they could get, dispersed to any other regional in Texas or any other regional. Like, I don't know if you saw the map, Ryan, but they showed a map of the U.S. and it showed the hosting sites and even just the teams that made it in the postseason. And when you look at a map, it's hard to not say college baseball is a southeastern sport for how many teams make the tournament compared to the rest. But, it's definitely fascinating to watch. And, just a couple other things for you, Ryan, before we run out of time here on the Rip City Drive. In terms of pitching, is there a player or players that you're keeping an eye on in terms of someone who could be like an X factor this weekend, where like his role could kind of determine how much success the Beavers have?
I would say in terms of from like a pitching staff perspective, if the Beavers do go with their rotation as they normally have, starting from the Hawaii series of Eric Segura, Dax Whitney, and Ethan Kleinschmidt. I think out of those three, the one guy that I'm going to be paying attention to, I think, is going to be Ethan Kleinschmidt, because talking to him during press availability in the middle of the week, he was asked about being in that kind of potential high leverage game deciding role in a regional, and for him, like, he's pretty even keeled. He's pretty, steady Eddie of like not letting the moment get too big from what it is. But for a guy that's been one of your best pitchers out there, along with Segura and Whitney on the mound, like that performance that he had against Long Beach State in the season finale, like in one of his best performances, I think, of the entire season. I think for him, that's going to be a really interesting moment because he's playing in his first regional as well as Whitney, but like in a big high leverage spot where, a guy is making a start like that for the first time, in a moment like that. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how a guy that's been level-headed and not letting the moment get too big responds in a situation like that, because regular season baseball at Goss is one thing. Postseason is a whole nother level.
It sure is.
Especially, too, with the amount of seating that gets added to the stadium. I think it's going to be a really interesting environment for him. And then coming on the bullpen, I would go in there and look at, Nelson Keljo, how he fits into this equation, if he's going to get called upon twice. Like, I know he's ready for that moment to own that role. But also, I think Kellen Oaks and Wyatt Queen and where they fit in to where Dorman wants to use them against all three of these teams that are going to come into the regional, because you got to stay prepared for the eventuality that if you do lose a game, you're going to have to go through the losers bracket. If you're Oregon State, just staying ready for that outcome, just in case. So seeing where Queen and Kellen Oaks fit, like they're two guys that I think you can throw in a high leverage spot, and also to kind of be that pseudo closer kind of role as well for them. Like, you've seen Wyatt Queen and Kellen Oaks have some sort of moments like that this season throughout the regular season. So those are two I would also put in there as well, in addition to Kleinschmidt and Keljo, because those are going to be, I think, the real critical pieces to this rotation that the Beavers have, and as well as like how they want to throw guys with the depth that they currently do have. Like, I think Whitney's going to be an interesting one just to see how he responds in his first potential start, if he's the guy to go on Saturday. And then Eric Segura, having that experience already, I think is going to be really big to help set the tone for Friday, because it was just over a year ago where he was a freshman making his first start in a regional. So that's something there where I think that experience will probably be very beneficial for both Kleinschmidt and Whitney for when they make theirs this weekend.
It's Apt Analysis. He's Ryan Harlan. You can catch his work at beaversedge.com. You can also find him Ryan_Harlan7 on Twitter. He's going to be at Goss all weekend. Make sure to stay tuned in to all of our coverage at beaversedge.com. And Ryan, appreciate your time jumping on the Rip City Drive with me today, and look forward to seeing you down at Goss this weekend, my man.
Yeah, no, of course. Killed it today as well, talking about some Beaver baseball. So,
absolutely.
Always love chatting about it.
Absolutely, my friend. Appreciate the time. He's Ryan Harlan. We'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. We'll wrap up hour number 1 and get you ready for hour number 2. Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Thursday afternoon. Hope everyone's having a great day so far. Big shout out to Ryan Harlan for joining us last segment. Could have probably talked to Ryan for probably an hour, if not longer. So much good stuff from him and over at beaversedge.com, getting you ready for the Corvallis Regional. Again, to gear up for everything TCU, Oregon State, St. Mary's, you can definitely check his work out at Beaver's Edge in addition to my own at beaversedge.com. But switching gears here, just a couple minutes here before we close out and get on to the 4 o'clock hour. Something I wanted to hone back in on that I saw just kind of off the cuff earlier in the show, which was the Oklahoma City Thunder, right? Very young team. They are, let's see here. I want to get their average age correct here. The Oklahoma City Thunder are 25.56 years old is their average. So average about age 25. So the fact that they've already made the finals should definitely send some shockwaves through the NBA and maybe even a little bit of scariness because they're young and already quite this talented. But something that I thought was really cool that I wanted to make note of, they are the youngest team to make the NBA finals since, drum roll here, your Portland Trailblazers back in their championship season. So Portland still owns that record with an average age of 25.03. So it shows how young the Blazers were the year they won the championship in 77. But I found that just very fascinating that it just kind of shows that young teams kind of usually have to go through a, quote, adjustment period where you have to, be bad, learn to win, learn to topple some of the, top dogs in your, quote, conference, and then kind of rise up the ladder, so to speak. The Thunder kind of rose up the ladder, I think, a lot quicker than many expected, and that's why you're seeing them, be so young and be in the finals. And, I think, it's rare. And that's where you have to look at it, too. The youngest team since that Portland team in 1977, some 50 years. So that's kind of a cool little thing. So, something small here on a Thursday, but I found that very cool. And, always got to give a chance to shout out the 1977 Blazers, man. It's the one championship we got, and we hold it valuable like a diamond. So I found that particularly interesting. And, the Thunder are going to go into this NBA Finals with a very, very young roster, just 25.56 years old average for the Thunder, but still not as young as Portland Trailblazers in 77, 25.03. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Thursday. When we come back, we'll be getting back into the NBA. We're going to hear some more from the Oklahoma City Thunder, hear from Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Anthony Edwards as well. And then we're going to switch gears and talk some NBA playoffs with Aaron Fentress. Want to get his thoughts on the Blazers pre-draft workouts as well. Blazers going to draft at 11? They going to trade the pick? We'll talk to Fentress next hour. You got the Rip City Drive. What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. The Oklahoma City Thunder are headed to the NBA Finals, finishing off the Minnesota Timberwolves 124-94 behind Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's 34 points. The New York Knicks, meanwhile, will look to stave off elimination against the Indiana Pacers at the Garden tonight, staring at a 3-1 deficit. That tip is at TNT on 5 p.m. Oregon State baseball is the number 8 national seed and will host St. Mary's in the Corvallis Regional tomorrow. Oregon is the number 12 seed and will host Utah Valley in the Eugene Regional tomorrow. Coming up on the big show, we'll be catching up with Aaron Fentress in about 20 minutes. Want to get his thoughts on some Blazers pre-draft prospects. He threw out an article starting to look at some potential owners or some names starting to creep up. And then a little bit later in the show, we'll be catching up with Mike Parker, with your voice of the Oregon State Beavers. Mike Parker doing another Beaver Baseball Regional this weekend. Very excited to get his thoughts. You got the Rip City Drive on a Thursday. Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Thursday afternoon. Hope everyone's doing well. 1 hour of damage in the books, 2 more to go. Excited to be with you guys, bringing you guys all the awesome sports stories of the day. Again, as we mentioned in the update, Pacers-Knicks Game 5 getting underway in just about an hour on TNT. Knicks 0-15, all-time series record when trailing 3-1. So history not on the Knicks side, but can they win one in the Garden tonight, force it back to Indiana, and see what happens from there? Again, pleased to have you back here on the Rip City Drive. First hour, we caught up with Ryan Harlan, talked Beaver baseball in depth, talked about the Corvallis Regional Field, his thoughts on how he sees things shaking out this weekend, and more than anything, just excited for baseball, right? I mentioned before, very excited for Oregon State hosting the Corvallis Regional and being a top 8 national seed, but not the only baseball. Oregon baseball hosting the Eugene Regional and getting underway as well tomorrow. Oregon, I think, was one of 4 or 5 states that had 2 regional hosts for baseball. And, when you consider, as we talked about earlier, how, you look at college baseball and, you look at a map and these teams that make it every single year, there's not usually a giant West Coast contingent. I mean, you've got your UCLAs, you've got your Cal Polys, your UC Irvines, your Oregon States, your Oregons. But when you move up into hosting territory and to have 2 hosts coming from the same state and coming from a state that is not, historically beyond, before Oregon State won their 3 championships, a baseball power is a state. I think that speaks credit to the program that Oregon State has built and the program that Oregon has built to compete with. So let's not all like I was talking about with Chris Burkhardt earlier this week. And he mentioned Pat Casey might be responsible for building 2 programs in the state of Oregon, because not only did he build the Beavers into a championship contender, his actions and the Beavers' actions may have directly impacted Oregon's decision making to be like, hey, we want to get some of that action too. So again, it's definitely fun to look back with history and kind of see how all that shook out. But nevertheless, Oregon State's got a really good team this year. I think Oregon's got a really good team this year too, and I think we're going to see some high-level baseball played in the state this weekend. Fun times down in Eugene and in Corvallis. But switching gears, talking a little bit more about the Oklahoma City Thunder. They clinched a berth in the NBA Finals. They'll be playing the winner of the Knicks and Pacers. And if you ask the Thunder, they'd probably love to see this series get pushed all the way to 7 games so they can have more rest and have the Pacers and Knicks be, pushed. But if you were to ask me what my gut is with this Pacers-Knicks game, I think the Knicks do win tonight. They got beat in the Garden both times, when the Pacers came in Game 1, Game 2. If the Knicks have any, quote, dare I say, I'm going to challenge their pride a little bit of home pride, right? Like the defend your home court pride that we have not seen from the Knicks this series. And I think Largely, that's because of the way game one ended. And, we talked about it with Keith Smith earlier in the week that kind of shell shocked him a little bit. And who wouldn't, right? You talk about a game that they had until Tyrese Halliburton, snatched it from the jaws of defeat to win that game. And, I think the Knicks have kind of been playing catch up ever since. They're not out of this series by any means. They can win a game tonight, make it 3-2, and then put all the pressure back on Indiana to close out at home. The difference I see is that Rick Carlisle, Tyrese Halliburton, and that crew, they're not intimidated. They feel comfortable wherever they need to go, and it would not surprise me to see them go to the Garden and take care of business tonight, too. So I'm mighty intrigued for that game getting underway in about an hour. But circling back to the Thunder and Timberwolves, a couple more audio pieces I wanted to play. One of the Thunder kind of, I would call like veteran leaders is Mike Conley, right? Mike Conley, now in his age 37 season, has seen a lot of basketball in his time. And, not sure how many more, elite seasons Mike Conley's going to see. And, he was kind of one of those players who was talked about in postgame last night because, a lot of this Minnesota team is pretty young, right? They can still have many cracks at the apple, so to speak, bites at the apple, so to speak, with Anthony Edwards being young, Rudy Gobert's not too old, Jaden McDaniels not too old, same with Julius Randle. But Mike Conley, there's only so many more runs he can make at it. And it was kind of interesting to kind of get his thoughts last night. This is what Mike Conley had to say on the loss to the Thunder. And it was his second straight year losing in the Western Conference Finals.
It hurts, it hurts more than, I don't think anybody can really feel what I feel. I can't ask them to feel that because they haven't been around as long and seen how, few opportunities you get at this, this chance. So for me, it's going to take a while just to kind of dissect what we just did and weren't able to accomplish. But, at the same time, proud of my team, proud of these guys, man. They really fought. Not just for me, but, just for the whole team. They did a great job of bonding together in the right time just to give ourselves this chance. So I appreciate them more than anything. And, we're going to try this thing again next year.
Mike Conley is one of those players I've had a great respect for from afar for many years, particularly when he was with Memphis and then obviously Utah before moving to Minnesota. But, just to think about his longevity in the league, folks, I mean, they're going to bring up a slightly rough memory here, but he is from that same 07 draft class that included Greg Oden, Kevin Durant, Al Horford, and he went fourth in that draft class. And, I have to say, any guy who can, play darn near 20 years in the league, obviously gets drafted in 07. We're sitting here in 2025. I know LeBron's made it look really easy, but, LeBron's kind of a freak of nature in the best way possible in that regard. But, what he's able to do to keep playing at the level he is, at the age he is beyond impressive. Usually, you start to see guys that get into their late 30s and they start to slow down a little bit. And, you look at what Mike Conley was able to do this year. Didn't blow you away with stats or, anything like that, but was a very solid guy this year as far as, being able to hit shots, play defense, and played a solid amount of minutes this year, too. Played about 25 minutes a game, so probably was serving as a good mentor for them, for Rob Dillingham, their young lottery point guard as well. So, there's definitely a lot to like, from the Timberwolves, but it's very clear that they need to retool. I don't know exactly how you can do that with, what they have, but, you look, I really like Randall and McDaniels at the wings. My question is Rudy Gobert. I think Rudy Gobert is a tremendous rim defender. I just don't know what can happen. We talked about it back in the days when when he was with the Utah Jazz, and it was hard for him to be on the floor when teams would go small. And I think to an extent, that can still kind of, exist. The Thunder in this series, they played, Isaiah Hartenstein, at the center, but he only played 15 or 17 minutes in this game. They can go small, too. So that's definitely something I'd be looking at for the Timberwolves this offseason. But Anthony Edwards, obviously a guy who knows and has the supreme confidence that he will be back here. He talked last night about how he feels just bad that they let Mike Conley down. And, Mike Conley maybe doesn't have too many more cracks at the thing.
It's exciting. I don't know why people would think it would hurt. I mean, it's exciting for me. I'm 23. I get to do it a whole bunch of times. I'm hurt more so for myself, for Mike. I came up short for Mike. Like I said, we tried last year. We couldn't get it. We tried again this year. We're gonna try again next year. But hurting is a terrible word to use. I'm good.
Yeah, and you see that's the confidence that Anthony Edwards has. It's like for him, it's not because he knows, right? He's been to the Western Conference Finals 2 years in a row, and he's 23 years old. So he knows that, he is the talent and, is in a good situation with a good coach where he can maybe have, some more bites at the apple. But, he was also pretty blunt and talked about how the Thunder came to play in this last game, and the Timberwolves didn't.
They came ready to play. We didn't. When you lose a game like this, it's not really too much to break down. They just did what they were supposed to do and won the game. They dominated the game from the tip. Can't do nothing but tip my hat to those guys. They came ready, man. So good job by them.
And, kind of building on that, too, obviously Anthony Edwards lost to Luka and the Mavs last year as the Mavs went on to the NBA Finals. But there's one thing about Anthony Edwards that I think is particularly impressive. It's, as I mentioned, it's his supreme confidence. There aren't, we've kind of talked about ego a little bit, and there are so many guys that only so many guys, I should say, that when they walk into a gym, right? Anthony Edwards could walk into a gym. Let's just say eras don't matter and we're in time machine. Anthony Edwards could walk into a gym with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Michael Jordan, LeBron James, so on and so forth, and be like, yeah, no, I'm the best player here. That is his confidence. And, I think he has a work ethic second to none, too. And that's something that he talked about. Like, I don't think we've seen the last of Anthony Edwards and the Wolves. He talked about his work ethic this offseason.
Nobody's gonna work harder than me this summer. I tell you that much. So, yeah, I'll try to make it happen again for Mike.
So, you see there, I mean, there's clearly some deep kind of appreciation with his teammates. That's several different clips where where Anthony Edwards is mentioning Mike Conley, and I think, maybe Mike Conley's value goes kind of beyond what the numbers say, and I think he is definitely a guy who can impact winning, and that's something that's not to be underrated. But as we look at it here, looking at the Timberwolves contracts for next year, Mike Conley will be back. It's the final year of his contract next year. So, again, barring a trade or something else, they will bring back, what will be a 38-year-old Mike Conley on that roster. I'm just kind of curious how many more, kind of NBA miles Mike Conley has left in him. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on as far as the Timberwolves as well. But ultimately, that's kind of where the Timberwolves stand. I saw something this morning that said the Timberwolves need to go out and try to, pair Anthony Edwards with Kevin Durant. Maybe the Timberwolves are a team that could get involved in the Giannis sweepstakes because Anthony Edwards is a talent, but it's very clear based on this series the Timberwolves don't have enough to compete with the Thunder. And the Thunder are what you're going to be comparing yourself to in the West for years to come. Right now, even though they're not in the playoffs and they're in kind of retooling asset evaluation mode this summer with the Blazers, I guarantee you the Blazers in some way, shape, or form are comparing themselves to the Thunder because what I just said last hour, the Thunder are average age 25 years old. And even that is partially impacted by Alex Caruso, who is their oldest player and, is in his 30s. So you take out Alex Caruso, and that team maybe is creeping in on that 25 straight up number. So, if I'm the Timberwolves, I think they have to go out and get more. And, I think your biggest salary piece to be able to do something is either going to be Rudy Gobert making 43, goes down to 35 million next year. So that's a much more palatable number. Julius Randle making $30 million. Maybe you have to, look to move some pieces around to kind of find another, quote, star to go along with Anthony Edwards, because I think it was pretty clear in this series, there wasn't enough besides from Anthony Edwards. Julius Randle had some good moments. I think he can kind of be that 2-3 guy, but I think they need more. So if the Timberwolves want to get over the top, they're definitely going to need a little bit more. We'll go ahead and take a break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, be catching up with Aaron Fentress, Oregonian Blazers reporter. Trailblazers has been having some pre-draft workouts. Curious to get his thoughts on that, NBA playoffs, and maybe even some ownership thoughts. You got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Thursday. Welcoming you back to the Rip City Drive. Pleased to have back on the program Aaron Fentress, Oregonian Blazers reporter. Fentress, what's going on, man? How are you?
What do you guys know about Ray Parker Jr.?
That would be more of a Shacker question, as he's running the music behind the scenes. What you know about it?
Well, I know all about Ray Parker Jr. He had the jams even before Ghostbusters.
See, now this is something, Fentress, that I'll admit to you is kind of flying over my head a little bit, being just 29 years young.
Yeah, this might be before your parents even met.
Entirely possible. But it's good to catch up with you again, Fentress. I didn't think I'd be back in the hosting chair so soon, but as soon as I got the call up, I'm like, all right, some more stuff's happened. We got to catch back up with Fentress. We'll be diving into some Blazer stuff, and you wrote some good articles over at the Oregonian that would definitely recommend people check out. But let's just start with the NBA playoffs. Thunder rolled to the NBA Finals. Pacers have the Knicks down 3-1. What are just kind of your thoughts on how these conference finals have shaken out?
I'm surprised in the East. I thought the Knicks had the most complete team next to the Celtics. So I'm shocked it's 3-1. I'm going to still give the Knicks a chance. If they can win tonight, then you just got to steal one at Indy and go back home for 7, right? It's possible.
Sure is.
The West, I've been all over OKC the entire time. I just felt like their defense is so good that they can give anyone trouble. And, man, they've been taking it to Minnesota, so I'm not shocked at all there. I mean, they won 68 games, man. Anything over 65 is elite. And so I'm not surprised at all that they rolled right through the West.
Oh, I mean, it's kind of an incredible, Fentress. Like, I saw a graphic put up the other day, and it was combining playoff wins, like the only teams to have, 80-plus wins entering the NBA Finals. And I think it was the Thunder, the Warriors, and then a couple Bulls teams. And you're like, wow, that's a pretty rarefied air right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of that might be because of the expanded playoffs 20-something years, 30-something years ago. But still, yeah, you start getting into 80-win mode or into that zone. That's impressive. What's scary is that they're so young.
Right.
Oh, my God, they're all kids. So they could be doing this for a long time, unless injuries strike or they decide they can't afford everybody or what have you. But yeah, it's pretty scary what they're doing with such a young roster.
Oh, it's amazing. I mean, I didn't even know this, Fentress, until I threw on ESPN to kind of get ready for the broadcast today, and they made note that this Thunder team didn't break Portland's record, but the youngest team to make the NBA Finals since that 77 Trailblazers team, they were like 25.03. I think the Thunder are 25.63. Nevertheless, I knew that team was young, but I still didn't necessarily know off the top of my head that it's like the gold standard for young teams.
Yeah, and aren't they the first team to do without a 10-year veteran or something like that in a long time, too? I saw that somewhere. I can't remember how long it's been. But yeah, it's what makes it remarkable is that experience is supposed to matter.
Right.
Right? The history of the NBA is filled with teams that sort of go through things, take their lumps, and then they overcome at some point after going through the process. Whereas this team just, they won in the 20s and they won, I think, 41, then 50-something. Then last year, I guess last year might have been their learning experience, but you'd expect them to have a couple more stumbles or have to go out and get a veteran leader or something like that. But no, here they are, 68 wins, and they're in the finals. So we'll see if they can pull it off. I mean, they haven't closed it out yet, but I think they run right through the Pacers. I think they put their clamps on Halliburton, disrupt Siakam enough to where they kind of make it, I'm not going to say 4-1 or 3, but at least 4-2. Then I'm still baffled by the Knicks. It just seems like the Pacers are just playing such good team ball, and their best two players are rising to the occasion, whereas Brunson's been putting in the work, but he hasn't gotten consistent help from another guy on every given game. So I give the Pacers credit. They're playing really good basketball. And it makes you wonder, man, why couldn't the Blazers have gotten Siakam to help Dame? I don't know.
I think it's a fair question, Fentress, because, I think back to a couple deadlines ago, like, I've said it all week, like the Pacers have like quietly been like, all right, let the chaos of the NBA around us, just kind of go on. We're going to quietly do our business. And you think about not only, the Sabonis for Halliburton trade was the big one, but, acquiring, Nembhard, the acquiring Siakam, the moves that they made, they weren't like, necessarily for better terms, like sexy moves, but they seem to have built a pretty good team. And I think people may have forgotten Rick Carlisle still got a championship to his name.
Yeah, one of the things Damian asked for, he said, just give me a chance. Give me some veteran guys who can shoot with some length and play some defense. And I was always like, Siakam's available. Go get that guy. And every time I would have that conversation about, Siakam's not going to move the needle. He's not going to win you a championship. Well, to me, winning the championship, it should not be the only standard you're shooting for. You're not trying to build a team around Damian Portland that can't lose. You're trying to build one that gives you a chance to make some noise in the playoffs. And so the Pacers go and get him, and look what they're doing with him. He's ripping it up right now. And then they went out and they got that length and they got that size and they got those guys who can play defense and knock down open jumpers. And that's what Dame asked for here, and he didn't get it. Well, Indiana put that around Halliburton. And granted, they're in the East, they're not in the West. I'll say that. But they went to the East Finals last year. Now they're have a chance to go to the finals this year. I think there were some missed opportunities there that Portland could have done around Dame, but that's in the past. And plus, Dame did blow out his Achilles. We can't say that would have happened if he was staying here. But I still think there was some avenues to be pretty damn good with him in the latter years of his career. But that's in the past. We'll see if the Blazers can build on what they have right now and maybe find themselves a star like Halliburton and then put some pieces around that person to make some noise in the next couple of years. But man, the West is just scary. And it was San Antonio going away with the number 2 pick, and Dallas gets, Cooper Flag. It's just the East is just going to be so difficult to navigate for the next 10 years at least.
Oh, yeah. No, and just kind of following up on that, Fentress, because it's one of the fascinating things. Like, I feel like the West has been pretty, even go back to, kind of when the Warriors got Durant, and it's like, okay, the West is just overly stacked. And I feel like it's kind of held pretty true to that point, but I would like to just kind of look at the Thunder because it's like you go back when Dame waved them away, right? 2019, and here we are, 6 years later, they're in the NBA Finals. Obviously, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander making the perfect trade is a huge part of that, but what can that say to teams like Portland or many others that are in the rebuilding phase that if you hit things right and you have the right coach, anything can happen?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you got to find a number 1 marquee guy, first of all, which they did. I mean, that trade worked out huge for them. And Paul George isn't even in L.A. anymore, right? But the big thing for me, and then they tanked. They went through a tanking process, and Shea missed bulk of one of the seasons where I think it might have been the season before they drafted Chet. Can't remember, but they had some injury issues with him, and they were kind of in tank mode because they were in rebuild mode. And then you get someone like Chet who's hitting, whereas Scoot is not hitting yet. You need Scoot to hit. You need Shaden to hit, right? Could Shaden be your Gilgeous-Alexander, and then maybe Scoot can blossom like Chet has? But the thing that really put him over the top for me was what turned out to be just a huge get. I think, was he 12th?
Oh, Jalen Williams. Yeah, I think 12th or 13th, one of the two. Yeah. Yeah,
see, it's the same thing with Golden State. Golden State, I think they got lucky with Curry. I don't think they thought Curry was going to be a transcendent player. I think they got him at 7. I think if Golden State drafted 3rd, they probably wouldn't have taken Curry.
Sure.
But whatever. You fell into Curry, that's fine. But they got Clay, right, at 14 or something,
right.
I think. And then you got Draymond in the second round, right? So that's where a team like that was able to make its inroads, whereas the same thing with OKC. You hit on someone at 12 like that.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that changes everything for you because you didn't have to go out and buy a star. You didn't have to go out and have another top 5 pick. You got to do that 12.
Right.
That's an all-star caliber player to go along with the other guy that you made a great trade for to get a bunch of picks and a marquee player. You end up with a better player in the trade and a bunch of picks. So yeah, it all worked out well for them. Good for OKC. And you just sometimes you get a little luck involved in there because it's not like the whole NBA knew that Shea was going to be great. Otherwise, teams have been throwing all sorts of stuff at the Clippers for him. So he just developed, and they scouted it. They believed in him. They thought we want that guy, and they got him, and it worked out. And what is he, 12?
Yeah, I mean, it's
13 years old, something like that.
Right. No, it's fascinating to me, how Sam Presti sometimes is playing chess while others are playing checkers, Fentress. So at least how it kind of looks that way. And I love his story. I mean, here's a guy who you look up his story, and it's like he, begged R.C. Buford for a job years and years ago. It's like, just let me get in, and, learn the business and rose up. And, now is probably what I would say at this point, maybe the top GM that doesn't have a ring, but that could, very well be coming here shortly.
Yeah, very well, and many more to come after that too. Because like you pointed out, they're super young. They have all those picks. Yeah. Like you can go out and do so much with all the picks. Well, no, there are other people's. A lot of them are other people's picks too. You got to hope the Clippers fall apart a little bit.
Right.
But anyway, they have a bunch of picks, so they can go out. I mean, why can't they go out and play for Durant?
They could. I mean, they could. Who's to say they couldn't get in the mix for Giannis? Right at that point.
Exactly. So. It's I'll admit there could be a dynasty brewing there, but at the same time, San Antonio's coming. I think Minnesota they have a number one guy. They can still retool. There's some other teams out there that I think are going to make the West. Houston, et cetera, they're going to make the West pretty dicey to navigate, even though OKC has reached a certain level, but. Can we see a franchise that could legitimately pull off the first three-peat since, Kobe and Shaq? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, probably someone a little smarter than me, Fentress, but I have kind of seen throughout kind of NBA Twitter is that the new second apron is undefeated. So I'm curious to see how ultimately the Thunder get close to the second apron and all those kind of things, because that's kind of what it was set in place for.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, that's the thing. Once you get the money involved and all those types of things, then it can change things in a hurry. But, again, with the picks and, being to maneuver in different directions and having that legit MVP caliber guy, there's just so many different ways you can navigate around that and still remain a contender.
Catching up with Aaron Fentress from the Oregonian here on the Rip City Drive. Just a couple more things for you, Fentress. Let's switch gears and talk some Blazers. They've started bringing in guys for the pre-draft workouts. Anybody kind of catching your eyes as someone who they could maybe target with the 11th pick?
Oh, I've gone through, all the mock drafts to see where people are projecting them, who they might take. And they brought in 5 guys today who the first 5 they brought in that are first-round caliber guys. I haven't really settled on, my crush yet. Usually I think, I had a big crush on Shaden.
Nice.
I really like Shaden at 7. At 3, I wasn't at all enamored with Scoot. I didn't really – I wanted the Blazers to get Brandon Miller. But
he was a nice player.
Second.
Yeah, he's a nice player.
Yeah. And I'm not saying Scoot can't still develop, but I just wasn't I wasn't like, oh, my God, you got to get that guy. This year, 11, and last year I was kind of like, whatever. This year at 11, I mean, there's some intriguing guys, but they all, which is what you're going to see at 11, they all have something where it's like, this guy can't shoot. He can rebound and play defense, but he can't shoot. Or that guy's a good scorer like Queen. He's a good scorer inside, but his defense is suspect, They brought in a guy today that I find intriguing, Rasheer Fleming out of St. Joseph, who's a junior. And he's, 6'8", 6'9" guy, can play the 3 or the 4, 7'5" wingspan, something stupid like that. Yeah, and agile enough to defend, smaller guys and be disruptive with that length and his reach, and then also defend inside, weak side, rim protector, all that kind of stuff. And he runs the floor great, and he can shoot the 3, man, 39%. I am amazed at how many guys cannot shoot.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's true.
I thought kids were growing up doing nothing but shooting.
I mean,
Curry and Lillard phenomenon, right? But there's so many kids out there who just can't shoot.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because, I agree with you, Aaron, because I think, that's why you're seeing, some, for instance, I imagine Chet Holmgren probably grew up shooting 3-pointers, right? I think he's kind of old enough and / young enough to kind of be in that mix. And to your point, AAU ball and everything else, I think you're hucking up an awful lot of threes. And, when you see a team like what the Boston Celtics did this year, you're like, maybe I want to be like them and just get up as many threes as possible. But, now that we're another week, deeper into the process, I got your thoughts on it, a week and a half ago or whatever it was, but your gut feeling at this point, do you think they take someone at 11, or do you think they'll really look to see what teams might offer them something for that 11th pick?
I think they will absolutely look to trade that pick.
Okay.
So I'm of the mind, until I hear differently, that they are going to do every single thing they can to win as many games as possible next year.
Okay, yeah.
That was not the goal this year. This year it was, okay, we want to be better, but, we're 100% cool with being in the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. And
Right.
then that changed when they won 10 out of 11, right? You have a new owner coming.
Hmm.
This is a league where you can win the championship and be fired 2 years later.
It's very true.
Right?
It is.
So you can't afford, Billups can't afford it, and Cronin can't afford to take. And I don't care about their new contracts either, because that's just, it's only going to spend $3.8 billion on the team with a couple of buyouts, right? So you cannot, create a bad impression for that new owner, because the new owner probably already has some people in mind for a lot of different positions. And so if you come in next year and you miss the postseason altogether, so you just treaded water, well, why are you staying? Why are you being kept? Now, if you get to 500 and you move the needle up to, we're 44 wins and we made the playoffs, what do you think about what we did? Then the owner's going to be like, oh, yeah, you guys are showing progress. Okay, well, maybe we'll sort of see how things go. But to me, drafting a project at 11, why?
Right. No, I mean, there's
future when you're doing that. Well, you might not have a future. And I'm not trying to be morbid about this or be dark, or it's just a fact of the sports world. So to me, if you can flip that 11th pick like you did the 14th last year with a future pick and Brogdon's contract and got Denny, if you can do that again. Now Shams is reporting he thinks it's going to be the wildest summer, NBA history. He pulled back from that for a second, but said it could be.
Yeah.
But we just saw the wildest trade deadline ever. So, yeah, there could be a lot of activity. The Blazers need to jump in that activity and come away with winning players who can push you over the top to get you over 500 and in the mix to get in the postseason. I absolutely believe that has to be the goal.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Kind of going along that, Fentress, I don't necessarily expect them to be, quote, the leaders in, say there becomes a Giannis sweepstakes. But it is intriguing to me that they've been kind of mentioned as a team who could get involved, considering they control so much of Milwaukee's future. Could that be anything that could benefit Portland, or do you think that's something where they're, not interested?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Bucks picks, that pick in 29 and the two swaps in 28 and 30 are going to be coveted, because the assumption is going to be, well, they're going to stink, right?
Right.
So then those picks become high picks. And the swaps look good to anybody, because if you figure you're going to be better than stinkage, then you're going to be able to swap with the Bucks pick. So yeah, those become valuable assets. And then you have the 11th pick this year. So you have things you can move around and do some damage with. And so yeah, if someone's trying to get Giannis, you might go out there and say, okay, now these picks, if Giannis is going there, these picks are going to be golden. Who wants them? Let's talk. Because again, they shouldn't be sitting around thinking about, we're going to draft someone really good in 28, 29, 30. No, you're trying to move those picks to get some guys now.
Right.
Now, as far as getting Giannis, I say no way. I don't think Giannis, any stretch of the imagination, is going to say, I want to go to Portland. And yes, he's under contract, but Giannis is not going to go, or Giannis is not going to want to go. It'll be worse than the Damian situation. You're not going to make a megastar like that go wherever you want to send him. If he's going to leave Milwaukee, it's not going to be a lateral move. He's going to leave Milwaukee because he wants to go somewhere where he thinks he has a better chance to win. I don't believe he's going to look at Portland's roster and say, that's where I want to go. Now, if the Blazers pull off a trade for someone else, an all-star caliber player, and then turns to Milwaukee and says, hey, we got your picks and your swaps, let's talk. And then Giannis goes, hey, maybe I can go to, let's just throw a fantasy out there. You trading for Booker because Booker wants out of Phoenix, and then, hey, Giannis, we got Booker, and we got Denny, and we got, come on over. And it's like, oh, okay, that sounds good. Then maybe, I guess that could happen. But just Giannis coming just to be the guy on this team the way it is right now, no way. I don't buy that for a second.
Yeah, and I think, it's definitely one of those things that I think is a little bit of a touchy subject, Fentress. But, if it was me, if I'm making that kind of money, and that is, ridiculous next level money, there's been some reports that Giannis may look to see which states don't have income tax, at his next spot. And when you're making that much money, Fentress, I'm not sure I'd want to cut Oregon my 22% either.
Yeah, I mean, of course. That's always going to factor in. What's hilarious to me is he's worried about state tax. He makes $50 million. So yeah, you pay extra, taxes, but you make so what? You take home 32 instead of 37 or whatever it will be.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that I mean, look, it's one of those things I think that's definitely on the list of considerations. But I would hope for people who are trying to, chase winning and chase a championship, that would be the deciding factor. But yes, that definitely doesn't help.
No, for sure. And catching up with Aaron Fentress here from the Oregon. Just a couple more things before we let you go, Fentress. Appreciate the conversation. The Blazers could choose to extend Shaedon Sharpe's rookie contract this summer. Do you think it's more likely they do, or more likely he plays his final year and they approach restricted free agency next year?
I think they make him a pretty good offer. I don't think it's going to be a max offer. I don't think you give him 200 plus. Earned that. I think you make a different, a lower end offer. Not low. I mean, not going to give him offer of 20, but I think you're definitely going to try and get him 25 to 30 in there maybe.
Sure.
And then he might balk and say he's going to bet on himself, right? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to come in and play. And then he becomes restricted, and then he can field offers and maybe up the ante for himself or what have you. But yeah, I don't think there's any way that they wouldn't make some type of offer to him unless Jody Allen says, let's wait on that because we're trying to sell the team and, maybe we don't want to add a contract. But I would hope that's not the case because to me, easily the best chance you have of a player on this roster elevating to all-star level, and I think even more so than Dane, is Shaedon.
Right.
Because of his ridiculous athleticism and all the things he does just effortlessly as he continues to mature and grow as a person and as a player. He's just going to get better and better. So, yeah, you cannot – I mean, they didn't want to trade Shaedon to help Damian.
Right.
So now, granted, I mean, he missed 50 games 2 years ago, and this year he struggled shooting from the outside. But, he's extremely talented. There's no way you can just say, we might let him walk. No, he's your blue chip right now.
Right. No, I couldn't agree more. And there's still the possibility, we haven't seen it yet, but he's probably the most likely of someone who could develop into, quote, like an alpha player. We're still waiting to see. But to that point, I think it's very interesting. Last thing for you, Fentress, highly encourage everyone to head over to theoregonian.com to check out his piece. You came out with a piece, Fentress, looking at some potential future governor candidates. Don't want to give anything away, but maybe what's like one or two names that got you intrigued?
Oh, man. I probably spent way too much time on that. I think I had 14 names. Okay, so I put this out there just to put it out there.
Sure.
Jody and Bert. And the reason why I put it out there is just because Jody Allen spent way too much time at games watching a horrible team. He clearly liked it, and so did Bert. So you go two birds with one stone. You can keep the franchise, but take care of the estate. So I threw that out there as something that maybe those two fit together a group, and I don't think they have the billions to do it themselves, but you put together a group. I put a bunch of people on there who have linkage to either other professional franchises, whether they're soccer or or baseball. As far as I swear, when I got done with this, I didn't walk away with thinking, oh, yeah, this is going to be the person. I mean, I got Bezos on there. That's almost cliche. I have his ex-wife on there, Mackenzie Scott, because, she has a bunch of money, and she's been, mentioned in the past as someone. Larry Ellison's on there, who's been involved in trying to buy a bunch of teams. Different teams. He tried to buy the Warriors, but he's 80. He's worth $200 billion. To me, if he wanted franchises, he could have bought several of them between, $50 billion and $200 billion, right? So there's, people can take out the list. I mean, so someone here, I'm trying to find this one guy here. Friedkin's a guy. So here's a guy, he's worth $7.8 billion. He was involved in the Celtics. He bid for the Celtics and, he didn't get the team obviously, but he owns a couple of professional soccer teams. So to me, if he had interest in trying to get in on the Celtics, he has interest in owning a team, unless it was just the Celtics for him. So someone like that with $7.8 billion in alleged wealth, who has an NBA interest, that to me strikes me as someone that could definitely be in the mix.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. And like Fentress was saying there, you got to throw in your Jeff Bezos, and I think Mackenzie Scott got the largest divorce settlement in human history when her and Bezos split up. So she's got a lot of money too. It's fascinating, Fentress. I love to spend other people's money, so let's just make it happen, right?
Right. I even put Lauren Powell Jobs on there, the
Yeah.
widow of Steve Jobs. Again, she is super rich, clearly, with $14.4 billion, and she owns 20% of the entity that owns the Wizards and the Capitals.
Oh, okay.
So she already has a foot in sports. So, but then there was a report out there that said she's trying to sell half of her holdings, so that'd be 10%, or 50% of her holdings is 10% of those. So to me, if she's going to go backwards, why would she want to go?
Yeah, interesting.
100 on another franchise. But again, it's someone who's involved in sports, who has a boatload of money, so I put him on the list.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Oh,
Again,
no,
I
but
highly
you
encourage
would-
everyone to go check out Fentress' story at the Oregonian. Fentress, we've definitely blown past time. I could talk to you for an hour, my
okay.
friend. I appreciate your time so much talking ball, and look forward to catching up with you again sometime soon.
All right, talk again, buddy. Bye.
Thanks, Fentress. Aaron Fentress from the Oregonian, the man. Some awesome conversation there. I mean, let's start running out some billionaires, man. Who's going to buy this team? He even threw out maybe Jody Allen and Burt Cole put together a group and keep it. Who knows, right? I love spending other people's money, so let's just keep doing it. You've got the Rip City Drive here on a Thursday with Brendan Slaughter. Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Thursday afternoon. Hope everyone's doing well. Big shout out to Aaron Fentress for joining us in that extended last segment. Some great stuff from Fentress, not only getting his thoughts on the Knicks, the Pacers, and then the Thunder, Timberwolves, but also I'm fascinated to see what are the Blazers going to do with Shaedon Sharpe. You know, you could get him under contract at probably a pretty reasonable rate this summer, but you don't want to lowball him because, you know, at the same token, he could be like, hey, I'm going to bet on myself and then want a lot more money. So I think his contract extension is fascinating. Like Fentress was saying, you could get him around like that 25 million mark. You'd really, really like that. I think you can extend him, you know, whatever it is, 4 or 5 years. Not exactly sure the contract length, but yeah, that would be something that would be mighty intriguing to me. And, you know, then obviously, you know, looking at some potential, you know, new governor prospects. And wouldn't that be something if, you know, if he, like you said, the Allen Burt Cold, you know, end up making an offer and keep it, you know, within a new group, to kind of move it out of the estate. I didn't really think about that, but that's obviously possibility. And, you know, you talked about Jody being so involved with the Blazer games and really liking it. I'm not going to put it past. I mean, it's entirely possible. But like Fentress was saying, Mackenzie Scott, Jeff Bezos, I mean, I don't know. We can dream big, right? All right, you got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter here on a Thursday. Final hour coming up. We got Mike Doc Parker talking some Oregon State baseball and more. What's good, Rip City? Brendan Slaughter here for the Rip City Drive. Final hour, 5 o'clock. Oklahoma City Thunder are headed to the NBA Finals after finishing off the Minnesota Timberwolves 124-94 behind Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's 34 points. The New York Knicks, meanwhile, will look to stave off elimination tonight against the Pacers at the Garden. Tip-off is just about now on TNT. Make sure to tune in, see if the Knicks can push it back to Indiana or if the Pacers are headed to the NBA Finals. Oregon State baseball is the number 8 national seed and will host St. Mary's in the Corvallis Regional tomorrow. Oregon is the number 12 seed and will host Utah Valley in the Eugene Regional. Coming up on the big show, we're going to catch up with Mike Doc Parker here in about 20 minutes. Want to get Mike's thoughts on another Oregon State baseball postseason he's going to be calling, the magical seasons he's called before, and maybe where this one ranks all time so far. So we'll get Mike Parker's thoughts in a little bit. You've got the Rip City Drive here on a Thursday. Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter. Hope everyone's having a great Thursday so far. Final hour of the show. Excited to bring you guys another hour of good stuff. Again, highly excited for our conversation with Mike Parker here in about 20 minutes. Mike is obviously one of my good friends, good colleague, and obviously one of the best in the business when it comes to broadcasting. And you know, I think some of his baseball calls down there at Oregon State have been some of his most legendary, and I'm definitely excited to get his thoughts on the Corvallis Regional. He was obviously off for a little bit of time and is now back, so I want to get his thoughts on getting back into the swing of things and obviously being at Goss for the national seed and all that. And, you know, Mike Parker's just good people, man. He's one of those really quality people that you enjoy having in your corner. So looking forward to that conversation with Mike. But obviously, as we mentioned, the Pacers and Knicks will be getting underway here momentarily from the Garden. Again, that's on TNT, True TV, and Max tonight as the Pacers will look to finish off that series. New York comes in as a 4.5-point favorite, but, you know, according to ESPN Matchup Predictor, they give the Pacers a 55% chance to win this game compared to 44 for the Knicks, 44 and change, I should say, for the Knicks. So, you know, odds makers think that the Knicks are favorited, but as far as like pure predictions, it sounds like it's a little bit more split, and that's kind of surprising to me given this game's at the Garden. But I don't know if I should be saying that so, you know, confidently, considering that Tyrese Halliburton and this squad went into New York and took care of business in those first two games against the Knicks. So I don't know if the home court advantage necessarily means anything massively to them. I think it just kind of, you know, is what it was, and the Pacers are a very focused team that, you know, knows exactly what they want to accomplish this postseason, and that's now being the Thunder's date in the NBA Finals. So lots to dive into there. Definitely going to keep tabs on that game as it goes on and gets underway. We'll be giving you guys some updates on that. But want to circle back to the Minnesota Timberwolves, Oklahoma City Thunder. It was a 124-94 win for the Thunder. We talked about the Thunder with Aaron Fentress a lot last segment, and you know, what they've been able to do, what they've been able to build has been very impressive. And earlier in the show, we played some audio from Mark Dagnall, Thunder head coach, who, you know, talked about how this team grew together. And I think that's something that's, you know, a bit rare in the NBA, where it's like you go from a couple 20-win seasons to a 40-win season to a 50-win season, and now where they are now, like it's been legit progress and growth. And I think, you know, that's something you see teams skip from time to time, right? You see guys moved out, guys moved in. And as I mentioned before, the Thunder went a very different route than like the Rockets did, right? You know, the Rockets were very content to stack up L's under Steven Silas, just like kind of the Thunder were early in Mark Dagnall's tenure when they won, you know, 20 and, you know, I think 22 games. But unlike the Rockets, who, you know, in my opinion, kind of did Steven Silas dirty. I mean, you know, the job, you were basically telling him to come in and tank and then kind of showed him the door. as opposed to Mark Dagnall, who kind of was there and was obviously there when they tanked. And I think they kind of tanked a little bit more naturally just for how young they were at the time. But you just kind of knew that if they stuck together, there could be, the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that's kind of the benefit for those teams that keep that cohesiveness. And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is obviously the star that, stirs the drink, so to speak. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, has talked a little bit after the game last night. He talked about, first off, just how big the Oklahoma City fan base has been in this process. Looks like we're still looking for audio on that one. Not sure what we got going on there, but we'll get back to that shortly here in just a moment. But let's see. I think we might have it now. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on the fans being with them this postseason.
Yeah, it's a really good feeling. I think stuff you dream about as a kid. A couple years I got here, there's some really dark times in this arena, not fun times, and these fans have been by our side through thick and thin.
And I think that's something that, to an extent, Blazer fans can relate to, right? There's been a couple lean years where there's been some lean, progress, as far as just lean years, right? Just like the Thunder had. And, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander talks about how, dark days and, they built up. And, it's crazy just how quick this process has been, because he talks about dark days. It really doesn't seem like that long ago to me, folks, that Dame waved away the Thunder. And that was when, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was still still with the Clippers, I believe.
When businesses thrive, so do our communities.
My name is Oscar.
Anyway, back to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He also talked about what the impact was of having his son watch him in the series.
Way I look at it,
I think the best thing about that moment is that he has no clue what's going on.
What would you like the power to do?
I think the best thing about that moment.
Sorry about that, folks. Appear to be having a few technical difficulties with our audio right now. We'll be looking to get that tightened up, hopefully here soon. But going back to, just the general point of the series itself. And, I think the Thunder absolutely had, the depth, the talent to really push this thing, to the NBA Finals, where we saw them go. And, I think ultimately you saw a team that was determined, right? You heard all year long that the Thunder needed to learn in the postseason, needed to get that postseason experience. And I think they got it to an extent when they, went 7 games against the Nuggets. And I think that was probably the most they're going to be challenged. I kind of agree with Fentress. I think regardless of who comes in the East or out of the East, I think it's going to be one of those situations where, the Thunder are the most dominant team left in the field, right? I mean, you obviously had a couple 50-win teams with New York and Indiana, but overall, it's the Thunder are on that rarefied air, like we talked about with Fentress, one of just a handful of teams when you count the postseason and the preseason that have had over 80 wins in the regular season, and that's not nothing. It's not nothing to scoff at. It's it's particularly impressive to where I truly think that the Thunder, what they've done since Dame waved them goodbye is nothing short of impressive, and I think that. They got lucky, right? It's very lucky when you get an alpha player who comes in and is able to, be the one that build around. The Blazers are in that mix right now trying to find out. I think the Pacers were able to find that with Tyrese Halliburton, but it's not easy to always find your alpha player. And, I think ultimately that's, what it comes down to is finding an alpha player, building around them, empowering them, and then, drafting right, getting lucky with health, having the right coach, and all those things. And, now I want to go ahead and play that clip from Shai Gilgeous-Alexander on talking about what it meant to him having his son watch him this year.
I think the best thing about that moment is that he has no clue what's going on, and he's just happy to see me. Like, you get caught up in life in general, you get caught up in so many things that, don't actually matter. And that's the biggest thing with having my son in the past year. He's put on the forefront. He's showed me everything that actually matters in life. And he reminds me of that every day I wake up, every day he wakes me up, every day he cries and wakes me up in the middle of my sleep. He's amazing. He'll see this one day, I guess. But yeah, he puts everything into perspective for sure.
You know, there's the league's MVP, definitely being humbled by the just process of being a dad. And, you know, I love hearing that, right? You know, we think of these players as, you know, being these, you know, deities and idols that are kind of up on a pedestal that we watch on, you know, TV and make these, you know, hundreds of, you know, okay, maybe not hundreds right away, but, you know, lots of millions of dollars, you know, to play basketball. And, you know, then you just have that moment where, you know, it's just kind of like being a dad a little bit. And I think that's definitely kind of cool. Last clip from Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he talked about how just the wanted to win was in the building and how no matter what, the Thunder were going to get that win last night.
Two things. I didn't want to go back to Minnesota, travel-wise. And then I wanted the fans to be able to enjoy the moment with us. I wanted them to be able to see it unfold in front of their eyes. I wanted them to be able to celebrate tonight in our building, go home, get drunk, whatever they do. I wanted them to have fun with the moment. And yeah, it was good. I just wanted to make sure that, like, above all, I could give my energy and my effort to try to give these fans what they deserve.
That was Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I want to play that clip again because I loved his order of operations. He didn't first say that he wanted to win for the fans, which I think is probably how I would have led. He led by saying, this is not where I want to go back to.
Two things. I didn't want to go back to Minnesota, travel-wise. And then I wanted the fans to be able to enjoy the moment with us. I wanted them to be able to see it unfold in front of their eyes. I wanted them to be able to celebrate tonight in our building, go home, get drunk, whatever they do. I wanted them to have fun with the moment. And yeah, it was good. I just wanted to make sure that, like, above all, I could give my energy and my effort to try to give these fans what they deserve.
I think that's really cool. You know, all three of those clips kind of have something different for Shai. And I you know, the clip about, you know, him being a dad, I think is super cool. I think it definitely kind of humanizes him a little bit and brings him down to a relatable stage. He's just like, he doesn't really understand. He just loves seeing me. And, you know, that's, yeah, man, that brings a smile to my face. That's a cool thing. And then, you know, you switch it over a little bit and you talk about how, you know, they wanted to win in OKC. I kind of like the little jab, like, you know, who wants to go back to Minnesota? I mean, really? Come on, right? I understand it's probably a little nicer this time of year than, say, January. But, no, I mean, he's right? When you get an opportunity like that, you don't want to extend a series. You don't want to see that series have to be, you know, going any longer than it is. And, you know, that's why, in a sense, I kind of look at the Knicks-Pacers tonight where it's like the same thing. I think the Knicks have the advantage being at home. But if you're the Pacers and you're like, well, why would we go back home if we can take care of it now? Like, you never put anything off because, you know, nothing is guaranteed game to game. And that's where I think, you know, if the Pacers come out and don't have that kind of killer mindset tonight, I think the Knicks will win this game and force it back to Indiana for, you know, what would be a big-time Game 6 as far as the pressure on Indiana. So, you know, you got to love the story of the Thunder this year. I love that, you know, they didn't make any complaints. They just quietly were like, okay, Dame, you waved us goodbye. This iteration of the Thunder is going to be gone. And, you know, you kind of just saw how that played out and, you know, how they built to this point. And here we are with them in the finals. And, you know, if we're looking at it right now, I'm kind of with both of our guests. I think that if the Thunder face off against the Knicks or the Pacers, most likely the Pacers, I'd pick the Thunder, man. Maybe it's only 4-2, but, man, the Thunder played great defense. They just shut down Anthony Edwards. They helped limit Jokic, right? And Tyrese Halliburton's been awesome. But if there's a team that maybe could bring down his star power a little bit, it'd probably be the Oklahoma City Thunder. All right, we will take a quick break here on the Rip City Drive. When we come back, we'll be catching up with Mike Doc Parker, Oregon State radio play-by-play voice, getting his thoughts on the Corvallis Regional and more this weekend. You've got the Rip City Drive with Brendan Slaughter on a Thursday. Welcoming you back into the Rip City Drive here on a Thursday. Brendan Slaughter with you. Hope y'all are having a great one so far. Pleased to welcome back to the program one of my good friends in the business and your voice of the Oregon State Beavers, Mike Parker, on the program. Doc, how you doing?
Hey, Brendan. Good to be on with you. Thanks for letting that America ride a little bit as you brought me back in because, you know, everybody, you have a song. We all have songs that for a moment take you back to a certain point. And it wasn't, you know, sports came into my life in 1966.
Okay, yeah.
Which is sort of what, for me, what I consider an age when life began. You know, when I began,
Sure.
okay, I'm reckoning my own life by seasons and this season and this team and that year. And for me, that was 1966. And I don't really have many solid memories before that. But at the age of 7, here comes baseball, Sandy Koufax, the Dodgers, 1966, a pennant. And for me, then another marker in life was that song because it was Horse with No Name was this big hit by America. And I was 14 getting into the car, maybe 13, on the way to school with a ride. And that song every morning seemed to play about the same time when we would discuss, what does it mean? I don't know. What does it mean? A horse with no name? I still don't really know what it means. I'm sure there's many theories as to what America is singing about there. We were told it was about a drug trip and this and that. I've always liked the song. Thank you for taking me back to when I was 13. I appreciate it, Brendan.
Oh, yeah. No, got to give the shout out to producer Michael Shacker on that one, Mike. But yeah, no, it's funny that he chose that song because if you can believe it, it's a song that I have on like my playlist and it comes out in the car. I'm jamming to it, man. Does that kind of surprise you for someone in their late 20s?
It does surprise me. It does surprise me. I'm glad you like it. We live in an age, I think, of more, you know, the song. I think there's more accessibility to music of all eras and times and the various services that play music, iHeart and others, of course. But I think it's great that you have it. So do you have an interpretation or theory as to what the song's about?
So I'll pull the curtain back a little bit, Mike. So
Okay.
I was not familiar with the song until it was in one of my favorite TV shows, Breaking Bad. And there's a scene where Walter White is driving along to that song and just having a moment. I remember watching the show being like, darn, that's a catchy song. And I've just kind of always associated with like that moment and like being sunny outside, jamming in your car a little bit, and you know, it's I think TV and entertainment definitely can add a certain level of, like you said, remembering. Oh, I heard this song in this movie or this TV show, and I think that's a cool thing too.
Well, if I remember correctly, there may have been a little bit. Breaking Bad may have had a little bit to do with drugs.
It did.
And so it's possible that, you know, it's one of my favorite shows of all time. In fact, I've been quoting it on my local show of late with respect to college football and the expansion of the playoff and to me, it's not the ruination of college football and expanding the playoff and all the things that are going on. And I just heard 76 teams being talked about for the NCAA tournament. To me, there's nothing wrong with March Madness and 64 teams, but let's make it 76. Let's go to 128. Let's just keep adding and adding. And for me, when I think about what's going on in college football, when I think about the power plays of potential power plays of the SEC and the Big Ten and the world that we're in, and this whole conversation that began long, I think, before you were born, when I was doing sports talk radio in Portland in the early 90s, with the constant clamoring of talk radio hosts, not so much college football fans, in my opinion, but sports talk radio, when it began to be ubiquitous in our land and talk shows were arising, this clamor by the hosts who didn't like shared national championships like in 91 between Washington and Miami. And the people began to beat the drum for, got to settle this on the field. We got to have a playoff. NCAA Division I football, the only thing that doesn't have a playoff. We got to have a playoff. Got to have a playoff. Now, that sort of talk began, and so you get these various incarnations of a bowl alliance, a bowl coalition, the BCS, and that's led us to the past now where what was really a great product, in my opinion, and college football was healthy as can be. You look through the 90s and look at how many people, Rose Bowl attendance and records and bowl games, and there was nothing wrong with the way the system worked. And this idea now we're just going to expand playoffs and we're going to get guaranteed spots for the power conferences. It's led to the dissolution of the Pac-12. It's led to me this whole notion, and I come back to Breaking Bad because I feel like the way Mike talks to Walter just before Walter takes care of Mike and takes care of business.
Yep.
But he pretty much says to Walter, we had a good thing going, and this is all your fault.
Yep.
Everybody was making money. We had a good thing going, and you had to go and screw it up because you wanted more.
Yep.
You wanted more power. You wanted more money. You wanted to be the one in control. And Mike Reed says to Walter White that, and that I feel like is a message I could say to the SEC, I could say to the college football powers that be, we had a great thing going with college football, but you got to keep grabbing more. I got to get these teams into my league. I got to do this. I just don't like it. And I feel like Mike's message to Walter White is the truth about where we are with college football.
No, I think that's apropos, Mike. And you know me, I love a good TV reference. And I didn't know that you were into Breaking Bad. So that's another thing that you and I are going to have to talk about as time goes on. But,
you know,
I'm just.
As is Better Call Saul. Very good, too.
Oh,
anyway,
I mean, Mike, you talk about two shows that started well, and finished well. Like, you know, not every show has been able to finish as well as those two have. Mighty impressive. But real quick, Mike, just along those points, like I totally agree with you. I think, you know, college football and just college athletics, you know, it's taken some hits recently. And to your point, like other than I 100% agree with you, Mike, with the exception of I was a wee lad at the time. But I think a lot of Oregon State fans would have loved for there to have been a college football playoff after the 2000 football season. What do you think?
Well, yeah, no, okay, but you can cite 1 year. No, I agree. I mean, there's a sense of, but it would have been nice to see what the Beavers could have done against anybody else down the stretch and have a shot, quote unquote, at the national title. Now, that's true. But to me, that one season, you know, for that one transcendent season that Oregon State had is the only time that the Beavers would have been in that kind of conversation.
True.
And this idea that we keep expanding playoffs to last year's playoff was, to me, not really a worthy endeavor in terms of the teams that really had no shot at it. I feel like things haven't changed much from the 1 year that the Beavers could have been in a Final Four type scenario, and that would have been fun to see play out, but not enough, not at the expense of what has happened in the ensuing years. So we can cite 1 year and say, boy, wouldn't have that been great? Well, yeah, but I would have preferred – I don't think there's anything wrong with USC and LSU after the 2003 season. You ask LSU people who were the national champions in 2003. We were, the Tiger Bait, but we're the national champions. You ask Pete Carroll and USC, no, we won the national championship. But they're both right. They both did. And in 1991, Washington and Miami went 12-0 each. They both were national champions. And for me, again, I say, what's wrong with that? That wasn't as bad as we got to settle it on the field. The we got to settle it on the field has led to me to each step along the way that's led more of a destruction of what we knew and loved, of which there was nothing wrong, and everybody was making money. Maybe the players weren't. The one thing that has happened to the good in the modern era is I do think it's also out of control now too, but nil and players being able to benefit off who they are and what they are, that's absolutely right. I'm not saying go back to days that didn't have the players getting their fair share, so to speak, but that's a little different argument than we need to have a much more convoluted playoff system with more teams and more, and that led to the dissolution of one of the great conferences of all time, our own Pac-8, PCC, AAWU, Pac-8, Pac-10, Pac-12 is no more. It's being rebuilt, but it's not the same and won't ever be the same again.
Right.
And I regret that. I'm in pain over that, in fact.
No, and I agree with you, Mike, and I think it's a perfect segue to move into the baseball talk because and before we do, I have to make note as well. Obviously, Mike, you were on the shelf for the Long Beach State game. How goes your recovery? Are you gonna be good to go this weekend at Goss?
Yeah, Thank you. Yeah, I was kind of in a fugue state there for a while. No, I'm sorry. I didn't go wandering in that way to a convenience store. But no, I'm. That was a brilliant idea on his part, though. Too. You got to give the writers credit for coming up with that. I mean, that was just
without
incredible. A doubt. But anyhow, thank you for asking. I am 3 weeks removed from the surgery and am recovering well from left hip replacement surgery. Had to miss the Iowa trip and the last 3 games against Long Beach State, but I'm feeling better. I tested out my ability to walk up and down the stairs at Goss Stadium at Coleman Field and get into the press box both Saturday during the inter-squad scrimmage.
Oh, great.
And again today, and I'm good to go. Thanks for asking. I'm looking forward to getting back to it.
Oh, yeah. No, Mike, I had to check in and because I had heard just through the grapevine that you were going to be out for a while and heard, obviously, that you had the surgery coming up and, obviously was wishing the best thoughts for you. But my selfish thought, Mike, was like, we can't have Oregon State baseball postseason without Doc Parker. So it makes me so happy to know that you're going to be there, Mike. Starting off right off the bat, we're just your thoughts on them getting that number 8 national seed. For me that morning, I knew there was a decent possibility, but until I saw it, I didn't know if I actually believed it.
I'm glad you asked it that way. And we're talking about images on screens with the great television shows we've referenced. It's not often as I gaze at my screen that I actually have what I would call a genuinely feel-good, almost an element of surprise moment where, okay, they're going on the selection show, revealing the seeds. I like the way they do it. They start with Vanderbilt and move down from the 2, 3, up through 7. I didn't expect to see the Beavers, but as they paused and hesitated, put the number 8 seed up, 8, period. Oregon State appears, and I thought, I mean, for me, it was just it's not as though I didn't think they deserved it. I think they do, and I think the committee, and I can't always trust committees to do the right thing, and that's what made me a little bit nervous. And I know the arguments against the Beavers getting an 8 seed, and even from a program in our nearer proximity would argue, and I'm sure they have, that they should have gotten it instead of the Beavers based on head-to-head, and I get that. If we were on the other side of it, I'd probably be making a similar argument.
Sure.
However, the committee took everything into account and I think studied the Beavers' resume closely and ended up, like I think we ought to, marveling over what Mitch and the team was able to do under those constrained circumstances and the dissolution of a league and going independent, carving out a schedule to put them on the road for 24,000 miles and 35 games, and the record that they had and the ranking and the RPI they held all year long through the one tough, believe me, it was tough. I lived through it, and I know Beaver Nation struggled through that 4-game stretch against the opponent down the road. That was rough, but it didn't undo their season from the national seed standpoint, nor should it have. It didn't. They had done plenty of other great stuff to warrant an 8 seed, but I'm telling you, Brendan, when I saw it, it was an extremely, I wouldn't say completely surprising moment, but it was nice to be somewhat surprised on the pleasant side of things. That doesn't always happen in this life.
Yeah, kind of the same thing, Mike. Obviously the selection committee, it's early Monday morning, right? It's a little different than all the other selection shows as far as basketball because they get through it so darn quickly. Like if you're not watching in the first 5-10 minutes, you're going to miss. I love how quick they do it. And to that point, Mike, I think my dog might have been a little bit surprised when I saw that number 8 seed. I let out kind of a little whoop. I was like, oh, okay. Because I'm like,
on early Monday morning. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And it's like,
I was watching it all alone. My dogs, they hear me let out whoops every once in a while for no particular reason. So, and I didn't, I just looked at that screen, saw 8 and thought, good for Mitch, good for the guys. They went through a lot this year and earned that 8 seed. I was proud of them.
No, absolutely. And, Mike, obviously the field, they end up TCU, USC, and St. Mary's, a couple West Coast teams and then a really good Texas team. I'm curious, just from your perspective, any of those teams kind of catch your eye as someone that you're keeping an eye on heading into the weekend?
I think it's if you're the 8th national seed and not the 6th or the 7th, I think you you should expect a more formidable field, perhaps, than if you're the 1 or the 2 or whatever. And they got it, in my view. I think there's even some seeds among the 16 that got a little bit better or more favorable draws than the Beavers did as an 8 seed. I haven't studied every team in the field, but I think what the teams coming to Corvallis are pretty good, starting with St. Mary's tomorrow night, particularly on offense, and how hot they were coming down the stretch. Nick Madrigal's cousin, Eddie Madrigal, leading the way, hitting .372 with 21 homers, 77 RBIs, coming off just an incredible WCC tournament where he was the most outstanding player in the tournament and is a legitimate power hitter. But they're also just a good hitting team. They've averaged about 12 runs per game down the stretch over their last 11 games. So I think that they can hit. They're going to score some runs. Goss Stadium at Coleman Field's a little different than Las Vegas Ballpark and some of the venues that the Gales played in.
Sure.
But the Beavers had better be ready. You know, they can't give up. Eric Segura is going to need to throw strikes. He's going to need to make sure he's not giving up any freebies because they have guys up and down their lineup who can hurt you. It's a good offensive club. Now, on the other hand, the pitching numbers would indicate that maybe that's an area where the Beavers can take advantage in this game and outscore them if they have to. They just got to find a way to win whatever kind of game they're in. I thought the Beavers finished the season pretty well with some bats coming back to life again. And so I kind of like the trajectory that they're in, no matter who they play in this Corvallis Regional. The other teams are good, too, particularly TCU. So, you know, we'll see. But I think the Beavers are going to play their way through into next weekend at home.
Catching up with Mike Parker here on the Rip City Drive. Mike, appreciate your time. A couple other things I want to touch base with you on. You know, we mentioned TCU, and if you look at their metrics, Mike, they were right there and had a strong case to kind of be one of those final hosting seeds, too. One thing I found interesting when I was peering through the game notes this morning is that if things go as expected, they are going to throw their ace, Tommy Lepore, against USC tomorrow. I had kind of speculated throughout the week, you know, maybe they would save him for a potential matchup with Oregon State. What do you make of TCU looking to throw their best pitcher in that opening matchup tomorrow?
They should do that. I mean, I've seen the Beavers almost get hung up, you know, by they've had games where they had to fight for their lives when they decide that they want to wait and hold somebody for the second game, and they've had to fight and scramble to pull games out. And I think TCU is absolutely wise to throw their best guy because USC they haven't had a great year, but they come in playing good baseball. They've been swinging it well. They're hotter down the stretch, like most teams are coming into the tournament. So I think they're right to go with their best pitcher and let game 2 take care of itself, but they got to get game 1 first. And I expect they probably will win that opener. And, you know, that's fine. But they're wise, I think, to go with their best out of the gate.
Yeah, it's definitely something interesting, and one of the things that really fascinates me about regionals, Mike, because, you know, I've seen, you know, over the years, Pat Casey do it both ways where he, you know, ran with his same lineup. I remember, you know, one of the 17 or 18 runs, you know, like Jake Thompson was like moved to Friday and, you know, things of that nature. So I'm always curious to kind of see if matchups dictate where guys pitch and, you know, hearing that Mitch is going to go with Eric Segura tomorrow. It sounds like Oregon State's pretty lined in with their rotation. I think the starting pitching, Mike, for Oregon State is very solid if all three of those guys are on. How do you feel about the bullpen and particularly a guy like Nelson Keljo coming out of it now?
Well, Keljo runs hot and cold, as we know. When he's hot, he's absolutely dominant. I think the switch from, you know, they're returning to what they did last year primarily with Keljo starting, with Segura starting and Keljo coming in behind him. They flipped that script this year for a while, but eventually settled back into what they did a year ago. And I think the roles are better suited for both guys. I think Keljo can be an incredible force out of the bullpen in different types of situations. But I agree with you about the Beavers starting pitching. I think, you know, with Segura, Whitney, and Kleinschmidt, that's a pretty good trio. The thing I've liked in the end, not only Keljo doing some good work out of the pen, his last outing notwithstanding, he's still in I think, a great arm to be able to bring out. But what Wyatt Queen has done down the stretch, and then different guys here and there have been hot, and that's what Rich Dorman's got to find in the matchups that you referred to earlier, the right guy for the right team at the right time, and go quickly to the next guy if it isn't particularly somebody's night. Like A.J. Hutchison for a while looked like he was going to be the lights-out dominant guy, and then he had a few stumbles late, but we know he's very capable of being dominant, as is Leif Palmer, as is Kellen Oakes.
Sure.
But Wyatt Queen has been a really, I think, a late sort of mid to late season discovery of a guy that can get a lot of outs, chew up a lot of innings, and he would serve the Beavers well. I think if they have to, heaven forbid, if they lose a game in the Corvallis Regional, I think there's enough pitching depth to work back through that and still win the thing, thanks to some of those guys I mentioned.
Catching up with Mike Parker, just a couple more things for you, Mike. Appreciate your time. Switching gears. Hitting, right? I think that, Oregon State's got some real talented players at the top. You talk about the season that Arquette's had, Turley's had, Weber's had, but there are some concerns as far as consistency 1 through 9. Do you think being at home is going to help them be able to get that timely hitting, as we approach the postseason?
I do in that Saturday scrimmage, and I realize that, again, this is just an inter-squad scrimmage. It's not the lights out in the regional format and a packed house in a playoff game with all of the pressure on it. But Dallas Macias hit 2 long 3-run home runs in the Saturday inter-squad. The ball just jumped off his bat. Ooh, yeah, exactly. You just said, ooh. That's how I kind of felt. That's a good sign. Trent Carraway finished better after a long slump. Easton Talt had 3 RBIs and a couple of hits in his last game. Cannon Reeder almost out of nowhere got hot and became kind of a home run hitting guy late. Wilson Weber went on a Johnny Bench-like tear. And quite honestly, two of their best and most consistent hitters during the year quieted down the stretch. Gavin Turley, 2 homers in his last 17 games, for example. Iva Arquette hit just 2 in his last 17. I think both of those guys are ready for an upsurge kind of in power, whether the travel and the long year and all of that.
Sure.
They still hit well, and they hit for average, and they had good years. But I think power numbers are going to come back up for those two, Iva and Gavin. And if you got other guys starting to find the stroke again, that bodes well.
Last question from Mike Parker here on the show. Mike, appreciate your time. Let's just put the cart before the horse a little bit. Say things go chalk. How important is it for Oregon State to have the ability to host that super regional, Mike, rather than have to go down to Tallahassee and play Florida State, who they're matched up with?
It's huge. It's absolutely huge. We saw that last year. Had Kentucky come to Corvallis rather than the other way around, I think the Beavers can win that super regional.
Sure.
Now, they've won every super regional save one in the super regional era when they've played at home, and that was the crushing Auburn loss in 2022. They lose by a run to Sonny DeShera and company at Goss.
Oh, that's tough.
The only time that's happened. And they've won their other 6 at home. So they're 6-1 in super regionals in this format. And the one time they did lose, it went all 3 games, and they lose by a run. I mean, I think it makes a huge difference. The guys haven't been at home a lot, but as Mitch Canham said, we're playing a lot of road games, but the idea behind it is we want to be playing the most important games at the end of the year at home, and that's what Mitch set out to do with this ambitious, this challenging schedule that they've navigated impressively to give them a shot for 2 weekends in a row at home. So I think it would make all the difference in the world, honestly. I wouldn't feel particularly optimistic about going down to Tallahassee and winning in Florida State if they do, as you say, prevail and come up here. They're good. It would be a tough out. But I think the Beavers are in a good position if they're at home in a super to get back to Omaha.
Absolutely. And again, when you have a national seed, Mike, the road to Omaha can go through Corvallis, and I think that's exactly what Oregon State wanted. And again, I'm very excited for the weekend of baseball it is, Mike. I'll be down there for one of the days at least. Look forward to connecting in person, saying hi, and sure happy that you're back to full health, my friend.
Good, and thanks, Brendan, for having me on. And we'll compare some. The best thing maybe about the shows are the soundtrack that Vince Gilligan discovered for those shows. Some of the greatest songs and how he even knew them. There's a song in Better Call Saul where Saul's walking down a hill when he's finding that couple that's trying to escape their debts or whatever, camping out. And he's got an old Bobby Bear song from like 1963, Find Out What's Happening,
Yes.
which I didn't think anybody knew but me in the whole universe, and yet there it is in the show. So I appreciate the great work that Gilligan did in those shows, so we got to compare notes someday.
Absolutely, Mike. And look forward to seeing you down in Corvallis this weekend, my
Thanks,
friend.
Brendan.
And thanks again for the time here on The Drive.
Good talking to you. Thanks for having me on. See you soon.
See ya. Mike Parker, Oregon State play-by-play voice. We'll take a quick break and wrap up the show when we come back here on the Rip City Drive.